Thank you for joining this episode of Real Talk, Real Trust. I'm your host, Ryan Picchini, the head of go-to-market strategy and channels at dotCMS. The promise of this webinar series is helping digital leaders build long-lasting relationships with their customers. And the foundation of that, what we believe at dotCMS, is trust. And so we focus on topics that are going to help you build trust with your customers and your prospective customers. The topic of our podcast for today is AI-driven UX, bold predictions about the future. I'm thrilled to have two guests with me, two of my colleagues, Zain and Maria, one who has a great macro perspective, another who has deep domain expertise in user experience. And so I'm going to let each of you guys say a quick hello, introduce yourself, your role at dotCMS, and a little bit about your experience as it comes to user experience.
So I'm Maria Fernandez, and I am head of user experience and also a product manager here at dotCMS. And I'm really excited to be here talking about real stuff, real world scenarios, and real ways that AI is shaping and changing the way we create digital experiences.
Great. Thank you, Maria. I really appreciate you being with us. Zain, consistent contributor on the podcast. So Zain, a little bit from you as well.
Hi, I'm Zain Ishaq. I'm the CEO at dotCMS. I bring in a little, as Ryan said, a little bit of a macro perspective, try to have one eye into the future on where technology is going, obviously, as it relates to AI. Happy to be here again.
Great. Just to get everyone in the groove here a little bit, we like to start with some rapid fire, which includes just a little bit of fun. We encourage our guests on the podcast to be concise in their answers. At the end, you will get a grading that means absolutely nothing and has no bearing on the rest of the podcast, but just a little bit of fun for our listeners. So why don't we go ahead and get started? Let's try and keep our answers to a few words, and we'll start with you, Maria, just so folks can get a sense of what's going on in your world right now. What is the TV show that's at the top of your list right now?
Right now, it would have to be Young Sheldon.
Young Sheldon. Okay, how about for you, Zain?
Unfortunately, I don't have one. I don't watch TV shows.
Okay. All right, Zain, we will take that into account for your score at the end, which again means absolutely nothing. Okay, let's change gears a little bit. Can AI generate experiences that build genuine connections? Yes or no?
Absolutely, yes. I'm pleasantly surprised that it's able to do that.
Great. Zain, your thoughts?
I would say yes. Short
Okay.
answer. Mm-hmm.
Great. We'll expand on that a little bit later. Maria, your favorite travel destination as of recent?
It would have to be Lake Tahoe during skiing season.
I haven't skied in Tahoe for a long time, but being in Colorado, it is a place that I hope to visit sometime soon. Zain, how about for you?
I would say Sayulita in Mexico during surf season.
Nice.
I was in San Diego, but I did not get on a surfboard. So I've got two bucket list items thanks to our guests for today. Okay, let's get into it. And because I know our listeners are probably anxious to hear some of your thoughts. We know that AI has overtaken discussions around, how we build experiences, how we create engagement with our customers. And there's so many questions that as someone who talks to, multiple customers a week that are on their mind, it's, should we use it today or should we begin testing? They're thinking about what are the use cases that are going to have the biggest impact while mitigating risk? What are the skills that are needed to deliver on those use cases? And what are the policies that need to get put in place in order for us to take advantage of AI? So there's this headline about AI and everyone is excited about it, but there's so many layers behind it that our customers are trying to figure out how to sort through in order to get to delivering experiences with AI. And I'm excited for you both to be here to talk about user experience because it's at the forefront of how our customers make connections. So let's jump in. I want to talk about the current state of AI as it's impacting user experience. What are the most significant ways that you're seeing AI have an impact on UX and design strategy today, Maria?
Mm-hmm. So first of all, it's just really supercharging the way we create user experiences, and it's enabling us to create better things and faster. So it's really has proven so far to have potential in aiding the UX designer in every step of the workflow, and especially more so when it comes to tasks that are language intensive, like research, synthesis, ideation, and things like that. But really, in every step of the way, even when it comes to generating ideas, creating mockups, and creating designs, because image generation is becoming as stronger and stronger, it's really going to help us all across the board. And it already is. Yeah.
Yes. And so how do you see that maybe in real world scenarios, or any maybe additional context, from the design process to understanding a user's needs to delivering personalized experiences at scale? Where is AI impacting that life cycle in concrete ways that you're
In every
observing?
step of the way. So when it comes to research and ideation, you can just feed it your personas, you can feed it all the data that you've collected through your research, and it'll give you faster, more impactful insights about your research, which will enable you to then move on to the next phase, which is ideation. And you can brainstorm with the AI assistant, and it'll act like as a co-worker, so you can bounce ideas off of it. It'll give you ideas for strategy, it'll give you ideas for design, and then you can move on to actually using tools that generate designs for you. You can feed it your design system, and you can generate alternative designs or mock-ups and variations of your design, so that you can put them out in the lab and again collect more research, synthesize that research using the AI, and then go back to the drawing table. And again, at every step of the way, research, ideation, creation, AI is there to help.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Maria, because those functions historically have been constrained to how deep you can go. The research, the ideation, the creation, the number of variants that you can have, and optimizing for those variants has always been something that I know when we kind of prep for this discussion it was finite, and it was limited, and so the limited options that you had was directly corresponded with the impact that the user experience could have. And so it's cool to see how UI is opening up new worlds for you, as well as being able to think through how every phase is going to get transformed because of essentially the diligence that you can do at that phase. And so knowing that it's impacting every phase of user experience, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about how AI is going to play a role in the future of user experience? Because there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of questions, and so what are the misconceptions about its impact?
I think the biggest one is that it's going to replace designers altogether. And I just don't see that happening. And not just for design, but it's also not going to replace developers. It's also not going to replace PMs. It's just going to make them more powerful. It's
Yeah.
just going to make you 10 times as effective. But you still need the design principle, the core, the basics, in order to guide the holistic picture, and in order to put together an experience that it's able to scale and that's ready for production. And the AI alone cannot do that for you. It's only as powerful as the questions and the prompts that you feed it, right? So it's definitely not going to replace designers altogether. Not everyone can design, even with these AI tools, and not everyone should design, even with these AI tools, because it's one thing to put together a mock-up, and another thing is to put together something that scales well, performs well, and is production ready. Yeah.
Yeah, Maria, the thing I want to hone in on that you said, and I'm going to ask Zain to weigh in on this, is it's only as good as the prompts that you put into it. And I equate that to human intuition, right? And human understanding of the business that is outside of a bunch of data sets. It is, it is grounded in relationship, it's grounded in connection, it's grounded in experience, but then it's accelerated through these tools. And that's the narrative that you talked about, not replacing designers, but empowering them or accelerating their work, is something that we have talked about across the board with marketers, with devs. Devs having the tools to build real components quickly, marketers having the ability to launch experiences faster and more of them. And so that theme, I think, resonates really well across the business. But that human intuition that still sits at the center, that's driving the AI models, is something that we believe deeply in. So, Zain, any additional commentary on sort of the role AI is going to play within UX, or the broader team who's delivering experiences?
Yeah, just to maybe echoing what Maria said, maybe it won't replace designers. Perhaps it might replace bad designers.
Yeah.
I feel AI obviously needs fuel, and fuel for me is data, right? Data, and that comes from general data hygiene, and then basically how context aware, you know, you are and how much context you can provide AI to be able to, um, you know, fulfill the need, so to speak. You said intuition, Ryan. I add the word empathy. I think design needs a lot of empathy, and there's only a human being who can, take what AI produces and then layer in the human empathy element, and then make it obviously, I guess, more um, relevant to your audience or user.
Yep. Yeah, the contextually aware piece and empathy are they're obviously tied hand in hand, and the data that's feeding that, or the insights that you're getting from running the models and the options is going to be so critical, right? Just because there is this major risk of losing governance around user experience, or and how it's created and delivered, that there's a major risk associated with it if it's disconnected from the context. And so it's something that the governance piece, it was subtle in your answers, Maria, but it was critical. I could tell that it is something that I know you're thinking about, which is probably a good transition to some of the future considerations. I think you set the stage nicely. What are some of the fundamental shifts that AI is going to bring to the core principles of UX, accessibility, usability, desirability? How is it going to impact those core principles?
So I don't think it's going to change the core principles because they are core for a reason. They're tried and true, and they're here to stay. They're proven. What it's going to do is just going to accelerate them, right? So our usability will become easier to test. So smaller UX teams that don't have a UX research are now able to rely on AI to conduct or synthesize some of the research that they do have available, or take advantage of the research that's available on the web. Accessibility will become easier to implement and easier to check for.
Yep.
And then desirability will improve because personalization will be very easy to achieve with AI. But again, just to summarize, it's like the core principles are here to stay. They're just going to be supercharged by AI.
Yep. Well, and so when you think about the core principles staying and being supercharged by AI, you talked about the importance of, smart prompts. You talked about the importance of, still inserting that human intuition in design. But what are the skills and knowledge that UX professionals are going to need to develop, say maybe in the next year or 2 years, to stay on top of their craft, to make sure that they're
Yeah.
delivering a best in class
Yeah.
UX experience?
I think the basics remain. If you want to get into the field of UX design, you need to look at human-centered principles. You need to be empathetic. You need to design with the user in mind first, and you need to advocate for the user. So all of that stays. The only, I guess, new in a way is skill that you really must have in order to survive and thrive over the next 12 to 18 years is just being nimble and remaining open and curious to adopting these new tools. And I say new, and I use air quotes because it's not really a new skill. Here in tech, we've always had to be adaptable. We've always been dealing with ambiguity when picking up new technologies. And it's the people that are successful in tech and have a long career in tech are the people that are open and nimble and curious, and they do bring in these technologies and they embrace them because they are helpful, even if they're buggy in the beginning, and they, come in with risks and, ethics and things that we have to consider, but we're pretty open about them. So as long as you're open and curious and embrace these tools, it'll be for the best.
Yep. Zane, anything you might want to add about sort of the future? I know we talked specifically around UX, but maybe I'll broaden it back a little bit to product and delivery teams that you're seeing in terms of when it comes to creating experiences, both capabilities and how consumers engage with it. What are the skills that that you hear from our customers that they want within their teams and that you're looking at within our teams at dotCMS to be successful?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's talking about prompt engineering as one of the foundational skills. I would go back to my previous point, data literacy. I just hear more and more customers now finally talking about how important it is to have data hygiene. And again, data is the language of the models. So I feel that's one of the foundational skills that you need to have while putting AI to good use. And maybe I'll throw in an additional um, thought, I guess, which is just to understand ethical AI, especially when it comes to UI UX. Um, you mentioned accessibility and usability. There has been a little bit of move towards the average, right? What's the most acceptable version that most users can access? So I think obviously with personalization, there is also a risk of hyper personalizing it. So I guess there's some balance where you have to understand, you know, um, constraints and basically some of the catches that might be there in overuse or over personalization, so to speak.
Yeah, and there's actually as the host, I'm not supposed to weigh in with my opinions, but I'm breaking my own rule. And that is, there's one thing that came out of both of your statements, which I think is a skill probably for UX leaders, and Maria, I'll let you weigh in, but also for anyone who's responsible for delivering experiences and marketing product, is decisiveness. There's going to be so much choice. Maria, you started with like, hey, we're going to have more option. We're going to have more details in terms of research. We're going to have more user journeys. We're going to have more, ways that we can design an experience. Like, but at some point, a human is going to have to look at the 10, 12, 6 choices and say, this is the route that we're going to go, and we're going to watch it, and we're going to test it, and we're going to optimize it. But there's going to be an inflection point where it's going to get overwhelming to UX professionals and anyone involved in delivering experience that they have to make a decision and move forward. Any thoughts or commentary on that, Maria or Zain?
No, I think you bring up to the table something that's really, it already happens even without AI. When you work with really efficient designers, they're pretty good about putting together all the options out there in the table,
Yeah.
on the table, and people get overwhelmed. And when that designer doesn't develop that ability to make a choice, they enter into analysis paralysis, and then the project doesn't move forward. And I think AI is just making that readily available for everyone, even if you're not very efficient or experienced. So now you're going to end up with all these possibilities. And if you don't know how to move forward, you're going to be a blocker, and something that was there to help you is going to hinder you.
Yeah.
So.
And that is when you get back to the promise of the series about being built on trust, at some point you have to make a decision on who your customer is and what they're going to care about, even within the context of AI. And so that decisiveness. Zain, it looks like you have some commentary on this too. So I'll open the floor if there's anything else you want to share.
No, I was just agreeing to what you mentioned. I think I don't know, like I think UX is less about just delight and more about all these micro decisions. So decision making 100% is how at least a UI UX might evolve. And again, the more context of where you are, the more data you have, the more data you can collect. It's just going to help you, to Maria's point, build some frameworks through which you can make those decisions so it doesn't lead to, paralysis, but more efficiency.
Yep.
Yeah.
It is a catch-22, Maria. I'm going to change gears here a little bit because I want to make sure we leverage your deep expertise in UX in a concrete way. I think you've given the listeners a nice view on concepts and strategy, but let's get to brass tacks a little bit and let's talk about what do you think the foundation of an AI-driven UX looks like? What are the things that make up an AI-driven UX?
That's a really interesting question, and we're transitioning into that space. The real answer is nobody really knows what's going to happen, right? But what I see in the future, like my vision for AI-driven UXs, is that we move away from having all these standalone apps all over the web, and we centralize everything within an AI assistant. If you're using ChatGPT, then let that be the center of your world. If you're using Gemini, let that be the center of your world. And then all of the rest of the players that used to be a standalone app could potentially develop their plugin or their mini GPT to plug into that Uber UI. And then from that Uber UI, you start managing all of your secondary apps. And I feel like it depends on the extensibility model and the integration model that these different providers come up with, and they're just trying to figure that out. But if they play their cards right, I think people will want to integrate into them, and it will be a very transparent way of interacting with the rest of your world through just one interface, which is what the interface that they've introduced, which is a chat-based interface, because it's language-based, because it's really powerful when it comes to language. But you can imagine that following their design system, we just feed them our data, and then they take care of displaying their UIs on the fly, which are going to be ephemeral, and they're going to be hyper-personalized depending on the ask on the prompt. And then they're just going to show up in ChatGPT or in Gemini, and you're going to be able to execute tasks that, you know, originally you would execute on separate standalone apps, but you're just going to be executing them from one centralized place. And so you are no longer, as a designer, in control of your static UI. What you can control is the components, right? That maybe ChatGPT will feed to the user and showcase depending on what they ask. And you're no longer in control of, you know, the design system that they use because it's theirs, but you're in control of the data and you're in control of the voice and tone. So even within the universe of ChatGPT or Gemini, and even within their UIs and their design patterns, there's still an opportunity for your brand voice to come through, for your soul, and for everything. So I think it's going to be interesting, and it's already, you know, becoming really interesting to see how many people are opting for that model and that paradigm. I know Box has created a plugin for ChatGPT so that people no longer have to visit Box in order to interact with their files. They can just do that from the AI assistant. And so they're open to communicating both ways. It's not just let me bring ChatGPT and their technology into my product, but also let the user bring my product into ChatGPT and communicate back and forth. So it's all exploration at this point. We'll see what happens though.
Maria, you definitely just sparked some fireworks with that perspective, and it's really interesting because, you know, historically the gateway was a search engine or maybe a mobile app as a starting point for some brands, and the perspective you just shared was this essentially going to be run through one single, you know, LLM model that's going to reference all the information that they need. And so the idea of having, you know, your data organized properly, your content organized properly, the ability to source that information to that new primary UI is very interesting. And I think the idea of composability becomes more and more important. The ability to deliver those experiences across any channel becomes more and more important. And so I think it will be unique to see how that evolves, because what we have seen at dotCMS is the integration of that technology into the current workflows. And if user adoption goes first to an LLM versus kind of the traditional paths to engage with an organization, brands need to be ready for both as that transition takes place. So, Zain, did you want to comment on this as well?
No, of course, can't possibly go to the depth that Maria just shared. But yeah, I think I agree with what you just your recap, Ryan. I
Great.
think the composability, and the word that I find myself using more often now is orchestration, which I never thought I would. But I think you know, the experience will be orchestrated, so to speak, based on, you know, behavior or user behavior. I think that, for me, in a nutshell, is the foundation of an AI-driven UX.
Maria, I think you touched on it, but I don't know if there's any additional commentary you want to make on another question I had jotted down around the new UI interface. How does it enable content creation and personalization? Obviously, there's going to be insights that you're going to capture from the AI models that will, for lack of a better term, prompt you to create content that you might not have known was important. So this idea of content analytics will become more and more important. And then delivering that content, you know, wherever they're engaging is going to be important. But anything else that you want to highlight in terms of how the new AI user interface is going to enable content creation and personalization?
So to me, it goes beyond just the AI interface. It's actually the AI model that's enabling us to come up with these insights, right? If we already had analytics and then we feed those analytics into the AI model, then the AI model is able to give us back the insights that are really actionable. And then us as designers, have to figure out how do we surface these insights to the user in a way that's compelling, useful, and inviting for them to act upon them, right? And that's when we start getting into agentic UIs at this point, or agentic AIs at this point, where
Yep.
it's like, I can help you do stuff, I can help you execute stuff based on these insights. And then, you have your governance, whether the user says yes or no, and whether they review what the AI has been generating, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of moving parts, but definitely the AI models are enabling all these personalization and these insights that in the past were really difficult and hard to get. And now they're putting them at our fingertips. And us as designers and as product developers, we need to really think about how we present these insights. And I know that people talk about becoming experts in prompt engineering and stuff like that. I actually see people in product becoming the experts in prompt engineering, and us just packaging in these prompts for people to use. Because overall users, like information workers, I don't see them really becoming prompt engineers. I see products becoming really good at prompting the AI on behalf of the users. And I think that's where the game really starts becoming, you start seeing the winners there, right? It's like, I
Yep.
have people that really know how to prompt engineer, and I package those prompts and I sell those to you
Wow.
prepackaged,
Wow.
right?
Yeah. That's that is a wild world of how the distribution of work changes pretty quickly in
Yeah.
those models. So with that, Maria, then there's also kind of a big shift if you're essentially taking prepackaged prompts to do the work that you need to do, and those are offered as a service. That even adds more complexity to the question I had around governance of UX. And so, what are the big changes that are going to take place as it pertains to governance of the user experience? As AI continues to evolve and it continues to play a bigger role. And what are the things that our UX professionals should be ready to take into account?
Mm-hmm. So as a UX professional, if you're willing and able to rely on AI for work, for production and things like that, you just want to make sure that you have certain governance specifics in place. And one of those things that you want to do is you want to double down on your design system and your branding guidelines and your voice and tone. You want to make sure that you have those established, and you want to make sure that you feed those into the system so that everybody that is relying on the AI is actually using that same memory, and so that the results are consistent and just, you know usable. Because if you don't have that consistency, then you're just going to have a bunch of different generations of content that don't make sense and is not really tied together to your brand. And always engage in AI processes that enable the person that's playing with the AI to review the results, because AI still hallucinates and we don't really know when or how or why. So you really have to make sure that there's a step in the process where there's a reviewer going through everything. And that's when we go back to talking about, well, is AI going to replace designers or not? Well, it's not, because you still need this person to be in charge of orchestrating, like Zain was saying, and just looking at everything holistically and reviewing and approving and curating. So we
Yep.
still very much need that presence there.
It's really interesting that the solution is the problem and the problem is the solution in this case, which is AI is what's going to allow you to scale, right? And create more content. I'll take one example, the brand voice. And that's scary because of hallucinations, and you have to have a human in the center who's watching all that. But then you can also use AI in order to police the new content that AI has created.
Yeah.
So that's it is something that, but again, a human still sits in the center of it, and that governance piece is going to be really critical because of the volume and because of the versioning that's going to take place across all elements of UX. Zain, I know that you have spent some time kind of looking at models trained to and evolving models to make sure that they stay on brand, they stay on voice. You know that you've as a big part of our work at dotCMS, making sure that we're consistent. Any commentary on this idea of governance around UX you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think my view on this is that designers are probably less going to be about, I guess, design documentation and more like product managers of these algorithms. Um, because at the end of the day, we talked about, decision making at scale. So you just have to make sure that, you can explain those decisions. You have an understanding of the biases that might present in these decisions. And then just before you build that algorithm/framework, that to Maria's point, you have all the brand guidelines in there, as well as, I guess, what your core design philosophy is, obviously, because there's always this risk of every design looking the same because everybody's using the same model.
Yep.
So that's going to be the biggest challenge, right? Yes, all designers aspire to removing friction and be able to, I guess, predict behavior. That's basically at the core of design thinking, but you also have to guard against all designs looking the same. I think that's going to be the challenge, and governance kind of rolls into that when you bring your, I guess, brand's look and feel to your design philosophy. So it's a challenge. I don't think anybody has the answer. It's going to be a lot of trial and error, but yeah, I think you should obviously aspire to these some of these roles.
Zain, I really appreciate the context there. I also think you probably left our listeners on a ledge with this idea of the how AI is going to enable sameness. It's a big topic, you know, if it's referencing the same data sources, if the prompts are generally trying to achieve the same things. What does that look like, you know, from a UX, from a content, for there's so many areas of the business. And so I'll put a pen in that one and let our listeners know that we will try to come back to that in further detail. But we are coming up towards the end of our time. Maria and Zain, you guys have given our listeners some tremendous insights to think about, but I wanted to give them some concrete takeaways as well. So Maria, let's say you are mentoring, which I know you have mentored many folks before, or giving advice to a younger colleague or a younger person within the UX industry, or even another leader. What advice would you give to them as they start their journey to explore how AI can impact the user experience?
Mhm. I would say, and you're right, I do mentor a few people out there in the industry, and we've had this conversation before. And if somebody's just getting it started and it's feeling very overwhelmed because there's a bunch of tools out there, and like we're up there in the hype right now, things will normalize. I would just say I taken a deep dive into this, and I can tell you two things. One, AI is really advanced when it comes to processing language. So any task within the UX process that has to do with processing language, like ideation, brainstorming, a strategy, research, synthesizing research, and things like that,
That's great.
that you definitely want to invest in as soon as possible because that's stable, that's reliable, and that's going to give you a high return of investment. When it comes to image generation, the model is not quite where it needs to be in order to be reliable, and in order for you to be able to feed it your design system, and in order for you to feed it your brand guidelines, and then for it to produce mockups or high fidelity mockups that are on brand. So I wouldn't push anybody to start playing with those tools. You can start playing with them, but they're not where they need to be. They're in beta, but they're definitely polishing these tools. And soon enough, we're going to be able to rely on image generation in a very consistent manner. But for now, start with anything that has to do with language. And so everything that has to do with ideation, research, and a strategy is really something that you can outsource or do with the AI. And that's where you want to focus your initial efforts.
That's great, Maria. Thank you. Thank you. You actually covered a few of my questions in one. So I think maybe I just have one more for you and for our listeners. How should they think about the impact or measuring the ROI of utilizing AI to improve UX? I think I have a hunch based on some of your comments earlier, but I'll let you try to give our listeners a few key takeaways.
Yeah. So the return of investment is pretty obvious when it comes to efficiency and just being more powerful, but it goes beyond that because it really will help you come up with more usable, hyper personalized user experiences. And those will touch on brand engagement, on brand trust, on user engagement. And they will be able to convert more people, more users, and it's so the return of investment goes beyond just cost efficiency and becoming faster and more powerful. It's really just going to help you come up with experiences that are going to make your brand stronger and your user trust your brand more.
Zain, I was going to pass to you, but I don't know there's much you can add to that. I don't think many folks there's anything else that we would put on that answer. But Maria, it was a nice tie-in because the idea of user experience impacting trust. Trust is built through a series of interactions and a series of great interactions. And so if you don't have both the volume and the depth of those interactions, it's going to erode trust over time. So that is all we have for today. Zain, Maria, thank you so much for being with us. To our listeners, thanks for joining. You can catch this podcast on YouTube or Spotify. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank our amazing marketing team who helps produce this month over month. So thank you to Michaela and Ina, and we'll see you on the next episode of Real Talk, Real Trust. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thank you.